The escalation of power is something that can be found in almost every long-running manga and anime, especially within the shonen battle genre. It's the simple ideology that each enemy and conflict the series' protagonist will face must be more powerful and further increase the consequence of failure than the last, inevitably resulting in an escalation of power among characters' ability, as seen in the genre's longest-running and most successful series, like Dragon Ball, One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach, just to name a few. So although this means of progression seems standard for the genre, it's called the escalation problem for a reason, as after years and even decades of serialization, a series over time can lose its identity and disassociate with a lot of the traits that made that series great in its infancy, and that can be one of the biggest attributes to the deterioration of quality over time among longer running series. It's been seen time and time again, and for me personally, I believe Bleach is the biggest example of this problem. The beginning of Bleach had a strong theme of overcoming grief and the death of the ones you love, and protecting the ones who are still alive, which is a wonderful theme that everyone can relate to and was part of the reason why the series was so successful in its earlier days. But over time, the series lost its theme and it got in a habit of just attempting to keep readers interested by introducing hordes of enemies stronger than the last, which over time led to the downfall of the series in interest and eventually to its premature ending in 2016. But it almost seems like a necessary evil because of the way Shonen Jump and just the manga industry in general is designed, especially for those series based in fictional worlds with supernatural abilities. Because I mean, who wants to read a fight against an enemy we know our protagonist can defeat? There's no sense of satisfaction in an easy victory, especially in Shonen Jump. So how is it that a supernatural shonen battle series that has been ongoing for over 3 decades has seemingly completely avoided the escalation problem? That series being JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So getting into how JoJo manages characters' abilities within the series, and I'm not going to act like it's some sort of mystery because myself and all of you guys already know the answer. It's because the series is split up into, as of now, 8 individual story arcs, which for the most part are completely separate from each other, and give the series creator Hirohiko Araki the opportunity to reset to 0, and essentially create a new story every part, with completely different power levels based on the tone and theme and protagonist of each part, breaking the norm of a constant progression in power after each major antagonist. This is why we can enjoy Joseph's story of saving the world against the Pillar Men and eventually the ultimate life form, but then follow the story of his son Josuke over 150 chapters later, where a small city in Japan is unnoticeably being terrorized by a serial killer. And not to sympathize with Yoshikage Kira's actions, but the overall threat in part 4 is on such a smaller scale from the previous parts 2 and 3, where humanity itself was in serious danger if Kars or Dio were victorious. But when it comes to Kira, his actions would have never affected anyone outside of Japan, or even the city of Morio except for the families of his victims. So although he is in every sense of the word a villain, his character breaks the escalation of power and stakes that have been a standard in pretty much every other series in the genre. This concept of being able to reset to 0 after each major climax is the beauty of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and allows Araki to approach each villain in a different way from most series, because with each new villain, we also have a new protagonist, whose bizarre adventure is just beginning rather than continuing. So instead of designing a villain to be more powerful and devastating than the last, in JoJo, Araki is able to design each villain to be completely different from the last, resulting in extreme contrast between villains rather than just another bad guy who wants to rule or destroy the world that is even more powerful. So although the concept of generational sagas is one way to avoid problematic power escalation, it's an amalgamation of many other things within the series, like stand abilities and Araki's untraditional writing style. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with stands, you know, those things we've been talking about on this channel for almost 2 years now. Well, stands are almost just as important as breaking the series into parts to maintain stable and consistent abilities. Unlike a lot of other powers in manga, stands have massive limitations, and for the most part, ability-wise will remain static for the entirety of their user's lifespan, of course with a few exceptions. So from the time stands were introduced in 1989 to now, nearly 30 years later, the series has had its highs and lows on the power spectrum, but by no means has escalated. In fact, looking at JoJo in the past 7 years, its most recent part JoJoLands has drastically de-escalated characters' powers, which may be just as much of an issue as Escalation, but time will tell. So just stands alone, and what they are fundamentally are a major part of what allows the series to retain its identity over decades of serialization. Looking at Jotaro, for example, although he was the main character in Part 3 and defeated Dio, one of the most powerful characters in the series, he was also a major character in Parts 4 and 6, especially in Part 4, when he was almost just as much of a protagonist as Josuke, but never was there a problem of, oh, I've already seen Jotaro defeat Dio, so him fighting Kira isn't interesting, because of how vastly different the two villains are in character and in ability, which is something most series struggle to accomplish. So to compensate for lack of depth, just increase stakes and levels of power to absurdity. So we've looked at how JoJo in its entirety avoids power escalation, but what about looking at parts individually and seeing the escalation of power throughout a single part's run, almost like treating them as separate series? For example, Diamond is Unbreakable's escalation of power in comparison to Steel Ball Run's, because unlike the entire series as a whole not having an escalation of power, individual parts definitely do. In Part 4, Josuke is strong from the beginning but limited to Crazy Diamond's established ability. Never does the stand develop a new ability or evolve. Rather, throughout the part, Josuke grows as a person and learns new techniques and ways to defeat opponents psychologically, with his stand's pre-established ability, which makes for some great fights that don't require constant power-ups. But in Part 7, Johnny is weak from the beginning, and doesn't even have a stand ability, rather just a strong will to achieve his goal. And throughout the part, we see Johnny get stronger and stronger, gaining new abilities and eventually one of the strongest in the series, the power of infinity with Tusk Act 4. And every part has its unique form of growth. Sometimes villains get new powers, sometimes they don't, and same with the protagonists. It's a mixed bag whether a part will end in a dramatic power increase through conscious actions towards evolution, or strong thematic intervention. But they do happen, and if it wasn't for the series being able to reset to 0, they would be massive problems, and without a doubt we would see JoJo's power levels increase to absurd levels. Just imagine if Araki had to continue the story of Giorno Giovanna or Johnny Joestar after the events of their respective parts, in a way that was formatted like other parts of JoJo, them being the main protagonist. I say this because in Part 8, Johnny Joestar's story did continue, but it was for a conclusion, not a continuation. So back to the idea that Araki has to continue the story of Giorno or Johnny after their massive power increases at the end of their parts, and they had to embark on a new journey that thematically fit in JoJo, which is light versus dark, and they had to take on a new adversary. Araki would have to introduce a character with an ability equal to or more powerful than Zero and Infinity, and with powers that absurd, it just wouldn't feel like JoJo anymore. We have already seen what this looks like in the storyline of the video game Eyes of Heaven, where all of the Joestar stories are continued, including characters like Giorno with Gold Experience Requiem. And what happens in that game? We get a villain that can overwrite reality itself and travel through dimensions to become the god of everything. Just imagine if Dio and the world over heaven were actual villains in a part of JoJo. That would be a prime example of the escalation problem and make JoJo disassociate with everything that made it so great for so long.
Act 4! それがバレンタインを追い詰めたエネルギーか？無駄！ゴールドエクスペリエンスレクイエム！無駄！お前が真実に到達することは決してない！スタープラッシュ！オラ！何？生ちょろいぞ！
So that was the escalation of power in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I was inspired to make this video and talk about this concept because of a video titled Shonen Anime's Biggest Problem, which was created by Reality Punch Studios, which was a great video. I enjoyed it, and it just pretty much went over all of the big shonen series, Dragon Ball, Naruto, Bleach, Hunter x Hunter, and how they suffer from this little thing called the escalation problem. I'm sure you guys know about it. We talked about it in this video. But yeah, how things can get out of control, and I wanted to talk about it specifically in JoJo because it isn't it does it so much differently from any other series, and there's nothing really comparable to it, you know, among its peers, all of the other, you know, huge shonen and even seinen series. It being the, like, only generational saga, that I'm aware of, it's able to get away with so much, like introduce the strongest ability ever with Gold Experience Requiem, and then just have a scapegoat of just, I never need to introduce it to the series again, which was with that funny little Eyes of Heaven thing at the end. That's probably what JoJo would be like if it wasn't so different from everything else, and these characters' stories had to continue. I mean, how else would you have, you know, an interesting story of Gold Experience Requiem trying to go up against another villain? It would have to be like Heaven to Sun to Dio, something crazy like that. But because of that video, and as well there was this response video created by Giguk entitled titled How to Fix Shonen Anime's Biggest Problem. Both of those videos were really good, and they got me thinking about how all of that works in JoJo, and the result is this video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed, and go watch those two if you haven't seen them already. Thank you all for watching. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and all that good stuff. So have a nice day, guys.